every night I wait right here with a warm story and a quiet voice. I hope you'll make this our ritual. If you'd like to come back tomorrow, hit subscribe and leave a little like so I know you were here. What kind of stories would you like to hear next? I found the box one evening, buried in the corner of the attic. It wasn't anything extraordinary at first, just an old cardboard box with brittle edges, marked with the smudged ink of faded labels. I didn't remember it. But then again, there was so much I didn't remember about that attic. The boxes stacked high, the layers of dust, the smell of old paper and wood that clung to the beams like memories of their own. It had been a while since I'd been up there. Years, maybe. I'd been cleaning out some things that had accumulated over the years, things that had started to feel like clutter. The kind of clutter you only get rid of when it's no longer useful. But when I opened the box, I froze. There was no mistaking it. I knew the sound of those old cassette tapes even before I touched them. They were my father's. Not for me. Not for anyone else, really. These were tapes he had made for himself. For reasons I never knew. I had never heard them before. I wasn't sure why I hadn't, but there was something in me that hadn't been ready to hear them. Maybe because I wasn't ready to hear him. My father wasn't the type to leave behind long, drawn-out words. He wasn't sentimental. He wasn't a man who spoke his feelings easily. In fact, the things he'd said to me in my lifetime words I remember clearly were few and far between. But these tapes, they weren't just his voice. They were fragments, pieces of a man I never fully knew. I sat on the floor of the attic, the box resting in my lap. I didn't open it all the way, just enough to see the edges of the tapes, yellowing and frayed, their labels curling with age. Some had writing on them, some didn't. I picked the first one I saw, Notes to Self, it read, in his unmistakable handwriting. The letters were shaky, uneven, almost like he'd written them without thinking, as though they were a part of him he didn't even want to admit. I didn't know what I expected to hear. Maybe nothing. Maybe something too familiar, too ordinary. But when I placed the tape in the player and pressed play, the first thing that came through the speakers was a breath, a deep, slow intake of air. And then his voice, low, gravelly, the way it always was when he was trying to steady himself, to keep himself from sounding too emotional. "It's August 14th, he said, almost to no one. "I think I'll make a list tomorrow. Things I still want to do. Things I haven't done yet." I hadn't heard my father speak like that, so quietly, so vulnerable. He'd never talked to me like that. He'd never needed to, I suppose. Or maybe I never gave him the chance. But there it was. His voice, recorded, stored away in a box, waiting to be found. Each word was like a small private window into a part of him that I'd never had access to. A part of him that was soft, uncertain, and in some strange way, full of hope. It wasn't the father I had known, the man who came home from work and barely spoke at the dinner table, the man who said good night without any emotion, the man who seemed to keep his distance even when he was right there. This was something else. This was a man in his own space speaking to himself, making promises, maybe even looking for answers that I never knew he had. I listened for a long time. A few more tapes played, each one revealing more. His thoughts on getting older, his regrets, his unspoken fears, and in each one I felt a shift. A piece of the man I had never truly seen began to take shape. It wasn't the man I remembered, and yet it was. It was the man he never showed me, but it was also the man I had been looking for without even realizing it. A man who had his own life, his own struggles, his own quiet hopes. A man who wasn't just my father, but someone in his own right. The tapes didn't answer everything. They didn't explain why he was the way he was, but they gave me something I hadn't realized I needed. A glimpse of the man I couldn't understand, spoken softly and privately into a tape recorder, left behind like a message in a bottle. I didn't stop the player. I let the tape finish, and when it did, I didn't know what to do. So I just sat there, the attic quiet around me, and let the silence take over. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anything loud or painful, but because my father's voice stayed with me. It echoed in the quiet spaces of the apartment, settling into corners I hadn't noticed in years. It wasn't just the sound of his voice. It was the way he spoke when no one was supposed to hear him. Something about that haunted me gently, like a question I didn't know how to form. The next morning, I carried the box downstairs and placed it carefully on the kitchen table. The light was soft through the curtains, catching dust in the air. I made coffee, as if that would somehow make the moment feel more ordinary. But nothing about it was ordinary. I picked up another tape. This one had no label, just the faint outline of tape spools behind the transparent plastic. I slid it into the player, pressed the button, and let it begin. This time, it wasn't a date. It started mid-thought. You ever just walk into a room and forget why you came? He said, his voice almost amused. I keep doing that. Lately, more and more. There was a pause. A long one. Then the sound of a chair creaking, maybe a cough. Then more softly. Sometimes I wonder if my memories are slipping through the cracks when I sleep. That hit differently. I didn't know when this was recorded. There was no timestamp, no marker, but the voice sounded older, slower, as if something in him had already begun to fade. He didn't sound scared, though, just aware, honest, and in a way, peaceful. I kept listening. Another tape, then another. All of them without any clear order. It became clear that these weren't messages for anyone else. They were just check-ins, conversations with himself, reminders, reflections, occasional stories that drifted between half-finished thoughts. He talked about the weather, about a dream he had where he was 15 again, running through a parking lot at night, barefoot and laughing, about the time he almost learned to play the harmonica, but gave up after 3 days. I didn't know these stories. He'd never told them. Not to me, not to anyone I could remember. That's when something shifted. I began to wonder, why were these tapes here at all? If he didn't mean for anyone to hear them, why were they so carefully kept? Why had they survived so many moves, so many cleanings? And then another thought came, softer but undeniable. Was I the first person to listen to them? Or had someone else, a stranger, a friend, a caretaker, heard his voice before I did? That thought made my chest tighten. Not in jealousy, but in curiosity. Could someone else have known this version of him before I did? Someone who met him later in life, after I'd moved out? After the silence between us had stretched too far to bridge? It occurred to me that there might be someone out there who knew my father better than I ever had, and they knew him not through long years of living beside him, but through these moments he left behind, these quiet, broken pieces of himself recorded onto fragile tape. I set the player aside and opened the box fully for the first time. At the bottom, nestled between a few blank cassettes, was a small folded paper. My breath caught. It wasn't labeled, just folded once, cleanly, and placed with intent. I opened it slowly. Inside, in that same shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "If you're still listening." And that was it. No date, no signature. Just the beginning of something, or maybe the end. I sat there for a long time, the paper in my hand, the coffee going cold beside me. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew this. I wasn't just listening anymore. I was being invited. It was wedged tightly between 2 blank tapes, as if trying to stay hidden. I almost missed it. But when I slid it free and turned it over in my hands, I saw it written in blue ink, small and slightly tilted, for May. Not my mother's name, not my sister's, no one I recognized, just that May. I stared at the writing for a long while, trying to summon any memory of the name. Nothing came, and yet something about it felt familiar in a way I couldn't place. I thought about putting it back. Part of me felt like I was crossing into something that wasn't mine to hear. But another part, quieter, steadier, reminded me. My father was gone, and this, whatever it was something he chose to leave behind. So I placed the tape into the player, pressed play, and waited. There was no preamble, no date, just his voice, warmer than I had ever heard it. "Hi, May." A pause. Not awkward, not hesitant, just soft. "I'm not sure if you'll ever hear this. Maybe you will. Maybe this is just me talking into the air again. But today, I was thinking about the first time we sat in the truck during the rain." Another pause, then a quiet chuckle. "You had that ridiculous yellow coat, remember? And you said the rain sounded like it was trying to tell secrets to the roof." His voice broke a little on that last line. Not with sadness, with memory. I felt it in my chest, sudden and strange. Whoever May was, she had been real to him. Not imagined, not abstract. Real in the way people become when you remember how they laughed, or how they stared at windows like they were looking at something beyond them. The tape went on. He told her about his day, that he saw an owl near the gas station, that he'd finally fixed the loose drawer in the kitchen, that he was sleeping a little better lately. And then, without warning, he said, "I miss talking to you." The words hit me harder than I expected, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, gently, without bitterness, just truth. I had never heard my father speak like this. Not to me, not to anyone. He was always composed, practical, precise, and here he was, speaking like a man who had allowed someone in, completely. It shook me more than I wanted to admit, because, while I was grateful to hear it, to witness this piece of him, I also realized something I hadn't faced until then. I had never been the recipient of this voice, this softness, this quiet affection. and part of me longed for it, asked for it. I listened all the way through. No goodbye, just a faint sigh at the end, and the soft click of the recording stopping. I sat there in silence, staring at the player, the tape still spinning even after the sound had gone. May? Who was she? Someone from before me? After me? A friend? A lover? A nurse? I didn't know. And strangely, I didn't feel entitled to know. All I knew was that she had received a version of my father I never did, and I wasn't angry, just hollow. The kind of hollow that comes not from loss, but from seeing something beautiful you didn't know you were missing. And yet, I was grateful, because hearing him speak that way, with warmth, with tenderness, told me something I had never dared to believe. He had it in him, that softness, that openness, that love. He had it. He simply didn't know how to give it to me. Or maybe he couldn't, but he had given it to someone. And that, for reasons I couldn't explain, brought me peace, because it meant the man I wanted to know had existed, even if only in the quiet space between two people I'd never met. I didn't go looking for May. Not really. I told myself I might, that I'd search through old letters, photos, maybe ask one or two people who knew him in the later years. But the truth was, I didn't want to reduce her to a name, a category. I didn't want her to become just another file in a story I was trying to understand. Because what mattered wasn't who she was. It was who he was with her. And I had already heard that voice. That was enough. I spent the afternoon sitting beside the box of tapes, not playing anything, just touching them, reading the faded labels, feeling the grooves in the plastic with my thumb. There was one tape left at the bottom, unmarked, dusty, and nearly stuck to the corner of the box. I picked it up and found underneath it something I hadn't noticed before, an envelope. Not sealed, not labeled, just yellowed slightly with age and folded neatly in half. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My breath slowed the moment I unfolded it. At the top, in the same fragile handwriting, was a date. March 9, 1998. I don't know why that date made my chest tighten. I don't remember anything significant about it, but the way it was written small, centered, like a heading on a final page, made it feel like it mattered. The rest of the note was short. Just a few lines, written in pen that had slightly bled into the fibers of the paper over time. Some days I feel like I almost get it. Not life, not all of it. Just the part where I'm supposed to be someone to somebody. But then it slips again, like a dream I woke up too soon from. Maybe I'm better at being invisible. Or maybe I just got used to the quiet. That was all. I read it again, and again. My throat closed slowly, not from pain, but from recognition, because it sounded like someone who had spent most of his life on the outside of his own emotions, pressing his hand softly against the glass, unsure how to break through without shattering something important. I sat back in the chair and stared out the kitchen window. The light was beginning to shift, that golden, late afternoon light that makes even dust look warm. It settled across the table, over the letter, and I found myself whispering, I get it now. I don't even know if I did, but it felt right to say it, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing the memory of a man who had been unknowable. I felt like I had been given pieces of him. Not the whole, maybe no one ever gets the whole, but enough to love him again differently. As someone fragile, someone flawed, someone trying. I refolded the letter and placed it gently back inside the envelope, not to hide it, but to protect it like it was something sacred, not because of what it revealed, but because of what it dared to admit, that he too had felt unsure, that he too had wanted to belong to someone, and maybe that someone had been May, or maybe not, maybe that someone was always just himself. A man recording his voice into tapes no one might ever hear, leaving behind truths he couldn't say out loud. I closed the box that evening, not out of finality, just a pause, like a breath between two verses. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of things unsaid anymore. I was simply holding them lightly and letting them rest beside me, without demand. I waited until the house was silent. No clocks ticking loud, no cars passing, just stillness. I dimmed the lights in the kitchen and placed the last tape into the player. The plastic clicked gently, like a breath taken before a memory. I didn't know what I was expecting anymore. I wasn't looking for answers, not really. I just wanted to be near his voice again, one last time. The tape started without warning. No date, no name, just a slow inhale, and then, I had a dream last night. He was small again. 4, maybe 5. We were sitting in the backyard under the elm tree. He was eating ice cream too fast, and it dripped all down his arm. My heart stopped. He meant me. I knew the tree. I remembered that day, though only in fragments. The heat, the stickiness, the faint sound of lawn sprinklers in the distance. I never knew he remembered it too. He laughed softly through the tape, almost like the sound embarrassed him. I didn't say anything. I just handed him a napkin. He looked up at me like I had all the answers in the world. A pause. I didn't. I don't think I ever did. There was something raw in his voice. Not broken, just exposed, worn. I wish I'd told him more. I wish I'd let him see when I didn't have it together. Maybe then he wouldn't have felt like he had to be so put together all the time, like he had to earn silence. I think I passed that down quiet like it was a virtue. That made me flinch, because he was right. I had learned silence like a skill, worn it like armor, not out of pride, but protection. We had built a house on that silence, years of it, carefully stacked between dinner tables and hallway glances and unspoken apologies. He's grown now, he said quietly. I see pictures sometimes. He looks like his mother mostly, but there's something in his jaw stubborn like mine. I closed my eyes. I wonder if he knows I tried. Not always well, but I did. I just didn't know how to say things in the moment. They always came later, or never. There was a sound, maybe a chair creaking, or him shifting. And then, I'm not afraid of dying, really. I'm more afraid he won't know who I was when no one was looking. The tape went quiet for a moment. I thought it was over. But then, one final line. If he finds these, tell him it's okay to be soft, to not always know. Tell him it's not too late to be gentle. The sound ended there. No final breath. No sign-off. Just that, like the last thought he had allowed himself to say out loud. I sat in that silence for what felt like hours, my chest tight, but not in pain, just full of all the things we'd never said, and all the things he had finally said when it was too late to hear them, and yet not too late at all. He had spoken to me, not as a father trying to teach, but as a man trying to be understood. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized I had heard him fully for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I didn't press play again that night. I didn't need to. The tape sat in the player, its spools still and quiet, like it had said everything it needed to say. The room felt full, but not heavy. It was a presence I hadn't felt in a long time, not just of my father, but of myself. Something inside me had shifted, not suddenly, not like a door swinging open, more like a curtain being drawn back slowly, letting in a different kind of light. I reached for the box, my fingers brushing the edges of each cassette. The ones with dates, with stories, with silences between words that now meant something. Each tape was its own kind of memory, not just of him, but of the space between us. I returned them gently to the box, one by one, as if tucking something into bed. Not out of duty, but with a kind of reverence. Not everything needs to be kept out in the open. Some things are meant to rest, but I didn't return all of them. One tape, the one marked simply "Later," stayed in my hand. I hadn't played it, not yet, and I didn't know if I would. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized something. Not every answer has to be heard. Some can just exist, patiently, quietly, waiting for the right time or the right person. I placed the box back on the top shelf of the cabinet, not hidden, just high enough to feel like it belonged in a place of quiet things. The lone tape, still in my palm, felt warm from the light. I walked over to the window, opened it just a little, and let the evening air move through the room. The wind was soft, not cold, not urgent, just present. I thought about all the things my father never said, the spaces between his silences, the weight he must have carried without knowing how to set it down. And then I thought about what I might say to him now if I could. I wouldn't ask why. I wouldn't ask for explanations or apologies. I'd just sit beside him in that same silence and say, "I heard you." That would be enough. I placed the later tape on the desk by the window, beside a ceramic mug he used to drink coffee from, chipped at the handle. I didn't write a note, didn't mark it in any way. I just let it sit there, like a small invitation to whoever might come across it next, whether it's me, some future version of me, or someone entirely different. Someone who might need a voice not their own, someone who might be listening for the first time. Because sometimes the quiet things we leave behind are the loudest when they're finally heard. And maybe one day someone will press play, not looking for answers, just looking for a voice that sounds like something they once lost, or something they never had. And they'll find it, just as I did, not as a mystery or as a memory, but as a man, sitting alone with his recorder, saying softly into the dark, "It's not too late to be gentle." The garage hadn't changed. The door still groaned on its hinges, the way it had when I was a kid. The air inside was cool, thick with the scent of rust, old motor oil, and dust that had long since given up trying to stay out of the cracks. Light filtered through the narrow window like memory, soft, golden, uneven. I stepped inside and stood still. The workbench was still there, cluttered in that careful, deliberate way my father always kept it. Not organized, exactly, but purposeful. Each tool had a story, even if I didn't know it. The red toolbox still leaned against the far wall, a coffee mug filled with bent nails resting on top. The pegboard held screwdrivers, wrenches, pliers, each worn, each smooth from use. I moved toward the bench, not touching anything at first, just looking, just remembering. This was the room where I used to sit in silence while he worked. I'd hand him tools, watch him fix things I didn't understand. He never explained what he was doing. I never asked. We shared that space not with words, but with time. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, standing in the middle of it all, I realized this was where he spoke. Not with stories, but with movements. With the way he wiped a blade clean before hanging it. With the way he kept a light bulb in his coat pocket, just in case. He hadn't known how to say what he felt, not with language. But he'd shown it in the way he always made sure the bike tires were full, the cabinet doors never stuck, the kitchen clock never missed a beat. He didn't say, "I care." He adjusted, replaced, tightened, restored. I opened the top drawer of the workbench. Inside were small things. Tape measures, pencil stubs, a broken pocket knife I remembered seeing in his hands a dozen times. And beneath all of it, folded carefully in a plastic bag, was an old cassette adapter. The kind you'd use to play tapes in a car that didn't have a proper deck. I held it in my hands, thumbed a cracked wire. It was nothing. It was everything. I could almost see him again, hunched over the dash of the old pickup, threading the cable through, muttering about how nothing ever fits like it should. He didn't listen to much music, my father, but he listened to sound. Machinery, engines, clocks, weather, and, as I had learned, his own voice spoken into a recorder, perhaps after hours spent exactly here, in this very space. I sat on the old stool by the bench and let my fingers rest on the table's surface. It was scarred with decades of work grooves, burns, and small indentations that told the story of a man who fixed things because he knew how, and maybe because it was the only way he knew how to express care. I closed my eyes and imagined him sitting beside me, not as the silent figure of my childhood, but as the man who'd recorded those tapes, the man who had wanted to be understood but didn't know how to begin. I wanted to speak to him. I wanted to say, "I know now. I saw it all," even when I didn't know what I was looking at. But the words didn't come, and maybe that was okay. Maybe silence in this place was enough. A kind of language we had both learned without knowing. I left the adapter on the bench, carefully coiled, as if returning something borrowed. I didn't take anything with me. Not a tape, not a tool, not a photograph. Just the weight of presence, his, mine, ours. And as I stepped out of the garage and closed the door behind me, I heard something. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. Like an old machine humming back to life after a long rest. And I realized In that moment, my father had never stopped speaking. I had simply, finally, learned how to listen. The house was still when I returned. Late afternoon, light pooled along the floor, soft and golden, the kind that makes everything feel like a memory even while it's happening. I set my keys on the table, shrugged off my jacket, and stood for a moment in the doorway, listening not for a sound, but for something deeper. There was no hum from the tape player, no voice coming from the past, just the hush of now. The box of tapes sat where I'd left it, closed, undisturbed. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. Everything it held was already inside me. The echoes, the sighs, the quiet truths of a man who had never quite known how to show himself, and yet had done it anyway, through hours of fragile magnetic tape. I walked to the window, opened it slightly, and let the breeze move through the room. It smelled like dust and early fall, the kind of air that reminds you to slow down, to sit, to listen. I sat by the desk where I had first placed the unmarked tape days ago. It was still there, still waiting, but not for me, not anymore. I looked down at my hands a little older now than when this began. Not physically, maybe, but something had shifted. I wasn't holding weight the same way anymore. I was holding space for him, for me, for all the things we never said, and for all the ways we said them anyway. I thought about the night I found the box, about the first tape, the breath before he spoke, the moment I realized he wasn't talking to me, and yet somehow he was. And then I thought about the man in the garage, fixing things so they wouldn't fall apart. Quiet hands, careful eyes. I'd spent so long wishing he'd explained himself, wishing he'd made the walls less high. But maybe they weren't walls. Maybe they were scaffolding. Maybe he'd been building something all along, and I just hadn't known how to step inside until now. I closed my eyes and pictured him, not as the figure I once resented for his distance, but as the voice I had come to know. Faltering, steady, human. And I heard him, not on tape, but somewhere deeper, in the way I breathe, in the way I pause before I speak, in the way I sit quietly with the people I love, and let them be exactly as they are. That was his legacy, not the silence, the softness behind it. And then maybe for the first time in years, I spoke aloud, just a few words, into the quiet, not toward the tapes, not toward the past, but into the room, into the air. Thank you for trying. I waited, not for a reply, but to feel how those words landed. And when they did, I found something I hadn't expected. Relief, not release. Just the sense that nothing else needed to be said. That this, finally, was enough. I stood, stretched, and walked toward the shelf. I placed the last tape, later, gently beside the box. Not inside it, just beside it, in case someone else needed it one day. And then I turned off the light, let the day fade into evening, and carried the quiet with me like a gift I had once mistaken for absence, and now understood as presence, after all.